of mind. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons. He serves on the Senate Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. He's also national co-chair for the Biden-Harris re-election campaign. Senator, thank you so much for being here. What is your reaction to what I've laid out there? CNN's reporting on the actual transcript of the president's interview with her, and also his commentary about Biden's memory that he will be bringing up in his opening statement this morning.
Kate, look, I think what really matters here about this whole kerfluffle is that at the end of the day, former President Donald Trump is facing 40 felony counts in a federal action because of his mishandling of federal classified documents, while President Joe Biden has been cleared. All the back and forth about the commentary by the special counsel, I think at the end of the day has been put to rest by President Biden's forceful, compelling State of the Union address on Thursday, which makes it clear that these stray comments by a special counsel in a report really don't amount to much compared to the underlying reality that President Biden has deep respect for the classified document process, fully cooperated, and his predecessor did not.
Her says that he called it like he saw it in his investigation. He says that he did not disparage the president unfairly. His report, as you note, highlights that there is a material distinction between the two investigations of Trump and Biden on classified documents.
That's an understatement to say a material distinction.
Oh,
One
I'm
charges a former president with 40 felony quotes, and the other clears the current president. Yes, that's a material distinction, Kate.
No, Senator, for clarity, I'm quoting how he put it in the report. So that's why I said material distinction.
Yes. Certainly.
Given that and given all of this added together, the fact of the matter is Robert Hur is coming before this committee. He's going to face questions about all aspects of this for sure. And it also does highlight that he's now a former special counsel, but he became a special counsel because the Attorney General put him in place. Given all of this and what you know now, do you wish that Attorney General Merrick Garland had not put him in as special counsel or any special counsel?
Look, that's a hypothetical that I think is best answered this way. President Biden has shown over and over his respect for the independence of the Department of Justice, for the independence of the Attorney General. Attorney General Merrick Garland has run his Department of Justice in a way that shows his commitment to independence, appointing a former Trump administration official, Robert Hur, to be the special counsel in this particular case. And in many other ways, President Biden has shown that he's maintained an arm's length distance from the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, in sharp distinction with the former president, who repeatedly pressured the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to act as if it were his own personal legal department. We have a president today who understands and respects the obligations of the office to treat classified documents in a different way. And at the end of the day, this report, and I expect the testimony that Mr. Hur will deliver today in the House, will reinforce that sharp distinction between President Biden, who puts our security first, and former President Trump, who doesn't.
That hearing is going to get underway very soon. CNN's going to bring it to everyone live. I also want to ask you, you were recently on a trip overseas, and I want to ask you about President Biden's recent comments on Israel's war against Hamas. The president called a military offensive in Rafah a red line in an interview this weekend. He said in the next breath, though, that he's never going to leave Israel. He's not going to cut off all weapons to Israel. Do you want President Biden drawing red lines with Israel?
Look, here's what I said to Prime Minister Netanyahu when I met with him in Israel just a few weeks ago, that he needs to understand the balance between having American support for continuing the campaign against Hamas to restore a sense of deterrence and security to the Israeli people after the horrific attack of October 7th, and his obligation to provide for civilian protection. That means if he sends a massive troop offensive of IDF soldiers into Rafah without providing any way for civilians to get out of the way of that combat, that would be, for me, something that Israel should not do, and would for the very first time lead me to discuss conditioning aid to Israel. That is the last thing on earth I want to do. I want to see us get a hostage deal. I'm wearing this yellow ribbon today because later this morning, Kate, I'm meeting with the father of an American-Israeli hostage who's still being held beneath Gaza by Hamas. This crisis in Gaza could end tomorrow if Hamas laid down their arms and released the hostages. But this is a war between Israel and Hamas. And President Biden is trying to balance showing deep concern for the civilians who are suffering and in many cases now starving in Gaza, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and the far right-wing elements of his government, ministers like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who have made it very difficult to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. President Biden is trying to do the best in a very difficult circumstance.
Red line is, carries a lot of weight to that statement. I don't need to remind you of when President Obama drew a red line in Syria and the fallout from that. The red line is what? And if the red line is crossed, it leads to what?
I think that's for President Biden to communicate privately to our valued ally Israel.
What is it for you?
I think it's important. For me, making no provision for humanitarian aid or for civilians to leave Rafah. There are more than 1 million relocated civilians who have fled to Rafah at the IDF's direction as they carried out attacks against Hamas that have flattened civilian infrastructure from all over the rest of the Gaza Strip. So there is no way to carry out a campaign, a military campaign at scale against 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah without massive civilian casualties if you don't allow for them to leave. In my meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said, I understand that, and we are getting a plan from the Army for how we will relocate civilians before that offensive. I think it's important to keep clear that distinction. I am in no way saying that Israel should stop its campaign against Hamas, just that it needs to conduct it given the unusual circumstances of having an enemy who is using civilians as human shields. They need to conduct it in a way that comports with international law and our expectations of our allies.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you, Kate.
John.